want to thank our sponsor, Runway25, which we are very proud to be working with, as they are a veteran-owned company that creates stunning aviation coins, patches, key rings and prints that showcase military services from around the world. If you love the Tornado, you can now own their high-quality PVC Tornado Farewell patch, Tornado GR pin and the stunning Tornado Farewell coin set. Make sure you head over to their website at runway25.com to check out all their amazing products. Thank you and enjoy. So we're here with Mandy Hickson, who was a former GR4 pilot and now motivational speaker and author. But yeah, Mandy, how are you doing at the moment?
I am great, thank you. I mean, considering we're in this very unusual circumstances of lockdown and around the corona time, yeah, I'm relatively good.
Oh, that's brilliant news. So how did you become interested in aviation?
Well, actually, it sort of goes back to when I was really young. So my grandfather was a Second World War fighter pilot, flew with Harvards and Oxfords. And, you know, he would tell me these stories of being out in Africa and, you know, he was testing, what did he say? I was pushing the boundaries somewhat by inverting it when it was not allowed to be inverted. And basically the oil disappeared out the engine and he had to crash land into the desert, you know, dodging ant hills and things. And wow. I was sort of, wow, you know, this is exciting. But at the time, that was just stories of the past. And then I was about 13 and my mum was reading the local newspaper and she sort of saw that the Air Training Corps was opening its doors to girls. So they'd only been open to boys until that point. And I was a little bit of a tomboy. I loved sort of all the climbing trees and I was just classic like that. She said, you know, they do canoeing. And I was thinking, well, that sounds quite interesting. And she said, but, you know, there's also a chance to fly. And I thought, oh, my gosh, brilliant. So I joined when I was 13 on literally the first week. And I loved it. I genuinely loved it. I loved getting my combat kit on, getting cammed up on my face, crawling through the mud, you know, and we flew. And so once I'd flown and it was in a chipmunk, which, you know, it's now in a museum, which makes me feel really old. But I did the first flying was on chipmunks and then I did bulldogs as well. And I just thought, wow, it was just like a dream come true. But yeah, women were still not allowed to be pilots at the time. So that was sort of quite a big shut door, you know, if you can imagine at the time.
But you caught the bug quite early then? Yeah,
really early. In fact, I was 40. My 14th birthday present was a flying lesson from my dad. And we went up from Barton Airfield just near Manchester, which was brilliant. You know, again, I thought, oh, wow, I can't believe it. You know, it's a lovely thing to do. I always think it's like dancing in the air.
Good way to describe it.
Yeah.
So yeah, talk us through when you joined the RAF and what was your experience going through the application process as a female?
Yeah, it was quite challenging actually, to be honest, Mike, because at 17 I was awarded a scholarship, got a flying scholarship, but still women weren't allowed to do it. But from there I got my private pilot's license in Blackpool, from Blackpool Airport, which was brilliant because you've got a coast. So if you get lost, you've got the tower.
Can't go wrong.
If you get lost, just look for Blackpool Tower. I was thinking, oh, pilots don't get lost. Oh, I assure you. Actually, we don't get lost. We get temporarily unaware of our precise location.
There you go.
Better way of putting it. Yeah, so I was flying and then I went to university in Birmingham. And I was in my second year. I was flying on the University Air Squadron, which is just such a brilliant organisation, you know, run by the RAF to get those youngsters in and get them interested. And I was flying on the UAS and they changed the rules in my second year and I just couldn't believe it. The timing was so brilliant. And I went through the application process and I failed all the tests to be a pilot. I was devastated, you know, all aptitude tests. You get to take them twice in your life. So I waited a year. I went back in my final year at uni and I took them again. I failed them all again. This is now not looking so good. But it was really odd because I'd really proved myself to be quite a capable pilot in the air. And the boss of this University Air Squadron sort of felt that the system may be flawed, it may be unconscious bias towards guys. And at the time, a lot of women were failing the tests compared to men. And so in the end, after much persuasion, many letters, well, they offered me a commission to become an air traffic controller. And I took it because I thought, foot in the door, I can make my case, you know. And the big thing, I think, when you join the military is they always say you are joining as an officer first and your trade is second.
Right.
But you know what? Most pilots will go, probably not, you know, I'm joining as a pilot. But actually, it really makes you do some soul searching when you are going to be signing up for a career in perhaps a pathway that you don't particularly want to pursue. But you have to keep on going back to, well, I want to join the Air Force. And it made it really ring true to me that is really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an officer primarily, and actually then I could try and make my case to be a pilot. And I did, and I was about halfway through officer training, got a letter back, and it just sort of said, you know, we're giving you this branch change. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I find out I've taken on the test case. They said they couldn't understand why all these women were failing the test, and they needed someone to go through to see if the tests were perhaps wrong.
Yeah.
And they did change the tests eventually. So I got my opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah, great story. But let's talk about some of the aircraft you started training on. And did you experience any sexism while you were going through that training course on, you know, I'm guessing the Tucano and then obviously the Hawk?
Yeah, so I did joint elementary flying training on the Slingsby Firefly. And then we weren't meant to do that, actually, because we had so many hours. There was a whole host of us that came from universities. And they said, well, you've got so many hours and there's so much backlog in the system. We're going to stick you straight onto Tucanos. But then we ended up holding for so long. They went, actually, it's going to be 2 years before you get to Tucanos. We do need to give you some hours. So we did do a very quick course, a short course on joint elementary flying training. And then from there, we did Tucano. And I was sort of with a band of brothers, you know, I use that as a literal term.
Yeah.
But it was mainly men. In fact, I had one woman on one course I was on Tucanos, which was fantastic. And then I went off to Valley, flying the Hawk. Again, I was with the same guys, and, you know, they were like family. And they were like my support network. I never really thought of myself as being massively different, if I'm honest, because I was just one of them. And also there were a couple more pilots on my intake. So we had Mitch Tompkins, who went on to become the first female Harrier pilot. We had a wonderful, you know, girl, Judith, who went over to America, and she did her fast jet training over there. And then sadly, the system was a bit flawed. When she came back, she ended up being sent to fly helicopters. So she ended up going back to her roots and becoming a doctor again. But we did have quite a few women going through, and we had Soraya Marshall, who is now the highest ranking female aircrew in the Air Force ever. Which is brilliant. So there was a great, you know, batch of women that were going through. So we didn't feel we stuck out like a sore thumb. When I got to Valley, though, it was interesting because 3 years previously, they'd had the situation where they'd had the very first women coming through the system. And that was Jo Salter, and there were two other girls. And two of the girls were struggling a little bit. But politically, the Air Force really wanted to get them to the front line. And so it was a bit difficult. They were being given additional hours and things. And a lot of the guys were sort of got a bit hacked off with it because they felt it was unfair. And actually, it was the girls that took themselves out of the course in the end and said, this is not right. You know, there's a safety implication to it. Jo went on and became the first Tornado pilot. But what I'm saying for that reason is when we got to fly the Hawks sort of 3 years later, there was still that sort of animosity towards, oh, we're not here to be forced to put these girls through the system again. But there was a slight change because you do 3-year tours of duty. A lot of those people had moved on. So actually there was a fresh batch of instructors. So we were seeing change, and there was real feeling of change afoot, which was brilliant. And you know what? I got so much encouragement. I mean, but just talking on like minor things, you know, it was one of the guys on my course said, Mans, I've got to have a word with the boss. And I said, why? And he said, we don't like the way every single instructor says one sexist comment to you a day. And I said, what? And they said, well, as I would walk in from the jets, one would go, we can tell which one's Mandy's flown. It's not parked straight. You know, they were really meant in, you know, no one meant it vindictively. Genuinely, I mean that. But you were getting 20 comments a day. Mm-hmm. And the guys on my course picked up on that, and they didn't like it. So they went to the boss and said, can you just have a word with the instructors and get them to stop singling Mandy out with these constant comments? Because
so you didn't personally go and like report anything
and I
yourself?
actually sort of thought, I felt almost embarrassed. I said, no, I said, oh gosh, when I got called into the office, I said, sir, you know, is this going to look bad on me? And he said, no, not at all. He said, none of the guys realise they're doing it. And I think that's it. When you're looking at change within an organisation, people often don't realise they're doing it. And it's only when somebody highlights it, as we're seeing at the moment, you know, with the Black Lives Matter, you know, it needs to sometimes be brought up to the forefront of people's thinking to get some change to happen.
So how many hours were required before you got posted to a frontline jet?
God, I probably need to look in my logbook for that. Thanks for that question, Mike.
Sorry.
Actually, I think you're sitting at around, well, I had 160 hours before joining the Air Force. So I think you gain about 40 hours. I think it was on jets. I think Tucanos was probably around about 100-ish hours. And so you're gaining about 100. So, probably around 400 hours, maybe, I think it is, before you then get posted to whichever your aircraft that you get posted to for the front line or for your operational conversion unit.
We're here to talk about the GR4. Was this your first choice when you were joining the Air Force?
Yeah, so basically I would have probably loved to go single seat if I was good enough, but I wasn't good enough to do it. Hold my hand up. I didn't get a single seat recommend out of
Don't
Valley.
tell the Harrier guys that.
Do not tell the Harrier how. No, do not. None of them will see this. It's all right. No, basically, you want to strive to be the best, don't you? And actually going single seat, and I'd have probably chosen Jaguars actually, as it happens, because they were the two that were around at the time, Harriers and Jags. But I didn't get that, and I'm a low level junkie. Yeah, absolutely. Give me low level. I would take it any time over air combat. So the natural progression for me would have been, without a doubt, to fly the GR4. So yeah, it was pretty much up there as my aircraft of choice.
So what were your first thoughts on the GR4 when you saw it up close?
I love it. I always think the GR4 looks like what it's designed to do.
It means business.
It means business, yeah. And I think it's got a good payload to it. It's a meaty aircraft. It's much bigger than you think as well, because you go from flying the Hawk, which I always think is like the Mini. It's the sports car, sort of little fast jet, You get to the Tornado, it's like, here I am. I'm the big brother, and you go up the steps to it. You've got to get the ladder to come in. And, yeah, you really feel like it means business, especially when you light the burners. My goodness, the first time I did that, I was like, oh, yeah.
Oh, we're going to get onto that. That's for
I've
sure.
arrived. You give a little pat of, I cannot wait to get my hands on this beast.
So let's talk a bit about your ground training. Where were you located, and how long did this last?
Well, the training.
The ground training.
The ground training. So yeah, I mean, each course, as you go through flying training, you have a ground training course, and it's always done on the base that you go to. So it's elementary flying training. I think it's about 2 months, and then it becomes more type specific. So in the elementary training, you're covering all of the actual air law side of things. All the generic flying stuff. Then you get more particular to the type. So as you get onto Hawks, you will be talking more about you flying a jet engine now. So let's talk about, all of the peculiarities of that, plus things like high speed flight. So, hitting the envelope Mach 1, those sort of things as well. And then when you get onto Tornado, again, it's about a 6-week course. It's right back in the books. I mean, it's a good job you do it when you're young, so that your brain can literally suck up this huge encyclopedic knowledge that you need. You sort of arrive, and just on a squadron, you're given books, this thick, and it's like, and this is the ops manual. This is just, the air traffic control orders. This is and you're thinking,
daunting.
It is quite daunting, and you sit in your room and you are studying hard. It's not just sort of wild time and parties at all. It is hard work. Yeah.
So as you mentioned before, let's talk about your first flight in the GR4 and kicking in the reheats for the first time. What was that experience like?
It was brilliant. I genuinely loved it. So you've done about 10 hours in the simulator up to that point. So you're really used to the cockpit environment, and I think the sims these days are so good, and we had just got some new sims up at Lossiemouth, which was so much better, and then when you get in it, so you're sort of familiar with the environment, so it's quite a sort of strange thing to say, but the big difference I remember was that when you're trying to taxi a simulator, you feel like you're a little child, or like a giraffe on roller skates, because it's really synthetic, the taxiing on the ground. It's fine when you get flying it. But when I got into the jet, it's like, oh, this is a lot easier to taxi as well. And I was flying with a guy, Squadron Leader Tim Rust, who's a fantastic instructor as well. And, he's so chilled, so calm. And I'm thinking, I'm flying in a tornado. But trying to be really cool about it. It's nothing at all. One thing I'll never forget, though, I walked out to the jet, and the tail fin tapers as it comes down. It actually tapers, and where the elevators are, and it was exactly in my eye line. And as I walked up to the back, because there was no visual perception of movement, I walked smack straight into it, and I nearly knocked myself out. I had my helmet by my side, and I went doing, and I thought, and I had this welt starting to come up. I was like the classic, comic book stars. And I was thinking, there's no way in the world I'm missing this first flight though. So I put my helmet on. I was thinking, oh, that's a bit painful, because I have this line across my forehead. But it was brilliant. As you say, lighting those burners, you are thrust back into your seat as you accelerate across the ground. And it's this fantastic lateral acceleration that you get. And, that whole feeling of, you're up, gear up, flaps up, and off you go. And it's just brilliant. It really is.
Yeah, because it must have been like an experience like, this is what I've worked hard for, this moment.
Yeah. And I think the big thing of realization for myself actually is because on Hawks, they are pushing you, they're testing you. Do you have the single seat capability? Do you have the processing power, the situational awareness, the decision making? And at the time, it was the T Mark 1. So it's an old-fashioned aircraft. It was like paper map, stopwatch, compasses. It really was analog in there. And then, so you've been pushed on how good can you be by yourself. You get into a Tornado and you've got a head-up display. You have a moving map. It's like, oh my goodness. And you suddenly realize that now they're not trying to catch you out. Now they're trying to teach you to fly the jet that you will be going to war in. And there's a really, really big difference. You can still fail, of course you can. And somebody did fail on one of the courses just behind me. But that was not the feeling. It was like, we want to get you there, and we want to get you there together. And also you've got a backseater. So you've got a nav that's there going, we're working together, we're a team. And it's like, this is a dream, So you've got much more capacity when you're working together with someone else.
So what kind of flying training would you do at the start? Like, was it basic formation? Were you starting to practice dropping bombs? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so you build up quite, quickly through the process, really. So you have to get used to flying on instruments again, because that opens it up enormously. Yeah. So by then you've already got an instrument rating of some degree. So you just have to have enough hours on type to get the instrument rating on that type of aircraft. And you just started doing a little bit of initial general handling, and then you progress through and you start to do some, as you say, some formation. You do a lot of bombing. So again, you build up through the different bombing profiles. So you'll start doing what's called lay bombing, where you're coming in very fast and low, 150 feet. And basically it's all about dropping weapons on the parameters that that they're expecting, because the computer now does all the work. Whereas on the Hawk, we were there going, oh, I think that's right. Because now you can what's called commit the bomb off. So rather than it pickle the bomb off, you're committing it, holding it down, and the CCIP comes in, the computer generated mark, and it drops it when it knows it should. So actually you've got a much more accurate weapons platform. And then you'll do loft bombing, where you come in and you pull up and you loft the bomb off. So if you can imagine you're trying to throw a ball over a wall. And then you'll do different high angle attack profiles as well, so that you can get more impact onto it. You'll do strafing, which is your air to ground gun attacks.
I bet that's fun.
Yeah, that's really good fun, actually. I think the best story I've ever heard, though, was when there was a guy in the back seat, and one of his students who was doing it for the first time, they dip in and they're heading down, and the back seater doesn't have an actual control column. So you do have twin stick aircraft as well, but this was not in one. He was just in the back seat with the nav's hand controller, which basically slews a mark along, and he was diving in towards this thing, and the guy in the back went, oh, because this guy was going a bit too low, and he pulled really hard as if he was pulling the control column, and he actually did some serious damage to the nav hand controller.
Oh, no way.
Not ideal.
Not ideal. So yeah, how did their GR4 handle, and what were its strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I think it's designed to do what it does. It's brilliant in low level. So with the technology on board as well, things like the terrain following radar, it made it a really capable platform. The fact that you can go in the middle of the night in pitch black in poor weather and still get to your target is is a phenomenal piece of technology without the pilot actually touching it. I mean, that is quite scary. The
like
first
magic.
time, oh yeah, I was there going, oh, talk about silence in the cockpit. There's no, I mean, we have this thing, sterile cockpit, where you're not meant to talk, at certain points. Well, that is a sterile cockpit. You are literally giving a running commentary of exactly what's happening on what's called the e-scope in front of you, which gives this prediction of what's going to happen, what's coming up. And you're talking about it. And I mean, the best training I had on that was in Goose Bay in Canada. And I mean, it's dark out there. I mean, if you want to know black, it's black at night. There's nothing. And we took off, and it was quite bad weather. I was flying with this really, I think it was a very experienced nav actually, rather than the student, because we actually deployed out to Goose Bay to do some training. And we went off on this entire sortie and took off. We plugged in all of the autopilot, staggered it down. You drop down incrementally to low level, and then we're flying. I saw nothing for an hour and a half. We dropped couple of different bombs on targets. And I could see like the moon would suddenly appear, and I could see we were in a valley, and it's like either side of you're thinking, oh my gosh, and you're just holding you're not touching it, but you have got your hand just in case ready, so it's just loosely around it in case it clicks out, and then you can just do an emergency pull-up situation. But it was exciting. So capability wise, it's fantastic at low level. What it's not so good at is air-to-air combat. You had the F3 for that. It's not designed for that. It's a bigger platform. The radars were not as good as the F3's ones for that side of things, but you could still do it, and you could still have a good dogfight against your colleagues. And we only did a couple of days of air combat training a year just to remain current on the air combat phase.
Yeah, and I want to get onto that in a bit, because that's a favourite question from our viewers. They love talking about DACT, even if the aircraft not designed for that. But we'll get into that in a bit, Mandy. But how did you find the wing sweep lever? Was it like a natural for you, or did it take a bit of getting used to?
That really took getting used to, actually. It's amazing, especially when you first start. And it's fine once you get through onto the squadron and things like that. It becomes much more automatic in your brain. But the amount of times that you've been coming in and you go, oh, or you're coming into formation and someone goes, wings wings over the RT, like, just click those forward. Yes, I didn't forget about that at all. But yeah, that does take, because it's just something alien. That's not something that you've ever had in your training up to that point. And so much of flying is about the processing. It's about creating the familiar patterns. And obviously that's in the checklist to stick your wings forward as you're slowing down and put them back. But I mean, you're not often going into 67 into that dart shape. 45 and 25 that tend to be the wings sweeps that you tend to use the most.
Yeah. So tell us about your first frontline squadron. What were you with, or who were you with? Sorry.
So I was posted down to 2 Squadron down at RAF Marham, or Shiny 2. It's called so very well because everyone gets promoted to a very high level from there. Damn, what happened to me? In fact, while I was on the squadron, my boss initially was, who is now Sir Steve Hillier, who was the former chief of the air staff, and his number 2 was Mike Wixton, who isn't now the current chief of the air staff. So let's just say the 2 people in my chain of command did pretty well for themselves. And in fact, a lot of the other guys have done very, very well for themselves. But 2 Squadron was a fantastic squadron, based out of Marham in Norfolk.
So what was the actual role of 2 Squadron? Because it was a recce squadron, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was a recce squadron when I was there, which was basically a real hilarity to the entirety of my course. Recce was not my highest skill set, let's just say. I became good at it, but like with anything, it took a lot of training. But to begin with, when we were doing basic reconnaissance at, elementary flying training, and then you do some basic flying training on a wet weather day, we'd go and they'd say, right, we're going to do some reconnaissance today. And they'd put up some, aircraft and they go, Mandy, what's that? And I was going, they go, yours or is it ours or theirs? I was going, theirs? They're like, no, it's ours. It's a Nimrod. I was like, of course it is. Of course it is. I know that. So it was hilarious. So when we got our postings given to us when we were all actually on this exercise out in Goose Bay in Canada, and the boss said, "Oh, Mandy, you're going to 2 Squadron," and everyone looked at me, especially this guy Snakey, who was one of my great friends, and he looked and he said, "Really, reconnaissance, Mandy? You're the worst reconnaissance person we've ever had on the squadron." So it was quite funny, but I did work hard at it. But it suited me as well. So a lot of my friends wanted to go out to Germany. I had met my partner by then, and he was flying for the airlines down in the south of England. And so he'd left the Navy by then. And I thought, actually, if I was to be at Marham, we potentially could have a life together. So, you're just trying to balance that.
Yeah, of course.
Balance out a bit. But so I'd requested 2 squadrons. So, yeah, started off as a reconnaissance squadron. And then obviously as it progressed, that role sort of changed when you got, things like the Raptor pod to go on it, and anyone could do the thing. But at the time, it was the GR1A and then the GR4A. Yeah. So it was actually incorporated into the actual jet.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned Goose Bay there, but it moves on nicely to my next question. Have you flown on any large exercises, and what's it like working with other nations?
So a couple of times, in fact, on my first squadron, I had the honour of going out to Red Flag twice. So Red Flag out of Nellis Air Force Base outside Las Vegas. Tough job. First, I was devastated. I didn't have enough hours. You had to have 1,500 hours to take part in the exercise, and I didn't have quite enough hours. But it was great to go out there as planning crew, as general dog's body. But, I could actually just suck up the atmosphere, see what the program was, see how the process goes on the planning side, and help out the crews that were flying. So I did it as a planner to begin with. And then in my last year on the squadron, I got to go out to Red Flag and actually participate in it this time. And it's brilliant. They have the philosophy, Mike, of you must train harder than you ever fight for real. Yeah. And if you think at the time, to put it in perspective, it was the operations that were going on were the build up to Gulf War II. It's the time period between the 2 Gulf Wars. They didn't really know what was happening on, on Saddam Hussein rearming the nation and the rest of it. So we were going to be out in the Gulf with the Americans, with Canadians. We had some guys from France out there. So actually, it was really important that you learn how to communicate with other nationalities, and the communication bit is the really important bit, but also understanding how they work. So working closely with the Americans, I thought was brilliant, but you realise that they do have a slightly different way of doing it. They really like to follow process, and the process is everything. Whereas the Brits, I tend to feel, could be a little bit more flexible in their approach. But I mean, the Americans are just fantastic, and everything comes with it. All the pomp of Red Flag. It is like being on the set of Top Gun the whole time, even down to driving onto Nellis Air Force Base and
shades on,
sprinklers going. All the you've gone from the desert, and then you've got these huge green areas. I feel like I'm on a golf course. It's like, welcome to Red Flag. You're like, oh yes, we've arrived.
Where the cameras, yeah.
Yeah, it really did feel like that, but it was brilliant. The flying out there is fantastic as well, because it really is bring your A game to the table.
Absolutely.
And the first sort of time I flew, it was like the learning curve is still pretty vertical, and just trying to get airborne on time is pretty challenging. Because there's so many jets and you're given a really small window to do it. So you've got to make sure you are absolutely smack on time. You get out into the area, and you're flying out over the Arizona desert, and it does replicate the desert out in the Middle East that we were flying out in the time. So, and also there's a lot of the different squadrons had different requests and different requirements that they want to fulfill. So, for example, we had a whole host of live weapons that we wanted to drop. So you have to, actually plan in your requirements into sorties. So if you're going to do a live weapon drop of £1,000 bomb, that has to be factored in. And they often would bring in different scenarios as well, things like a downed air crew. So suddenly you'd be in the mission, and it would change to someone has ejected. Right, let's set up a different scenario. Who's going to be the on-scene commander? Changing the planning as well. So yeah, it was brilliant, really, really good, but an incredible learning curve.
And just as a side note here, Mandy, was there any jealousy from the RAF looking at all them, the American shiny toys?
Oh, yeah, of course there was. Yeah, I mean, especially when you're on these lines, and we've taken, say, 8 jets out there, and we're thrilled. We're like getting our scraps of our spares together, and the engineers honestly are phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
They get the jets together, and you think, how have you managed to salvage something from a different jet? We've borrowed it from this one. They would put robbing. We've robbed that one. And you're thinking, gosh, it's like a moving spare aircraft. Mm-hmm. And then you look down the line, you've just got this line of F-15s, line of F-18s, and you're like, oh, and they look so new and polished. Oh, yeah. We're really jealous. let's not mince our words.
Yeah, so you obviously I'm going to move on nicely to this. Have you ever actually flown in combat?
Yeah, so I did 3 tours of duty over Iraq. So we were based out of Ali Al Salem, just outside Kuwait City, and yeah, you sort of do it on rolling detachments out there, and I came back literally a matter of weeks before Gulf War II started. So our squadron had just finished out there, and then we came back, and so we therefore didn't get to take part in Gulf War II, which was a shame. Because I say shame, that sounds wrong. I know it's a really odd perception to get across to people that perhaps you're not warmongers. You're not there saying, I want to go to war, but it's like basically
it's what you train for, yeah,
and then not fulfilling it. So,
yeah.
You know, like basically saying, I'm going to become a sprinter, and by the way, you're never going to take part in the Olympics. You know, it's sort of like you want to do your job. And, you know, a lot of people say, oh, but is it not scary? Do you know what? That's not what's going through your mind. You've trained for it, and you want to perform to the best of your abilities. And a big thing when you go out there is that you don't want to let your team down.
Of course, yeah. And was there any resistance being, you know, a woman going into combat from like even other nations? How was that for you?
Yeah, it was a bit more challenging. So when I sort of said earlier on, you know, this incredible support network, when I got to the squadron, it was slightly different. There had been one female nav that had gone through. They'd never had a female pilot on the squadron before. And it did take some getting used to, from both parts, by the way, absolutely. And the majority of people were fine. But it was just balancing out, really, and everyone finding their feet, you know, just the normal sort of like, you know, very light pornography on the walls, you know.
Yeah.
Well, to go in, and on one occasion there were, you know, first day on the squadron, all the screensavers were naked women, and that's just not really that happy with that, so I made them naked men, and then the naked landscapes. So things like that, you know. It's not because it's, again, not done vindictively, done because people just don't think. But one thing that was always quite funny, and it was like a standing joke, I'd get out to the Gulf and you walk into this, you know, a barrack block, basically. It's like an extended porter cabin, sort of 20 rooms, shower at each end, little kitchen in the middle, and you go into your little cubby hole of a room, which is like single bed, desk, and a cupboard. And I'd walk in and I'd always be given the one with wall-to-wall pornography, literally covering the walls, you know. And I'd strip it all down, put it outside, shout, "Porn's up, boys," you know, as a joke. Yeah. But within minutes, it had all disappeared. It was miraculous. But it's just, when I say it now, it sounds shocking. And women perhaps watching this might say, why was she so accepting of it? It wasn't a problem then, because, you know, it was a different time 20 odd years ago to the time we've got now. You know, it wasn't the Me Too culture. And it wasn't just like I accepted it. You push back, but you push back within small increments to make change. And everyone is adjusting to it. You know, trying to keep your femininity is pretty hard in that environment. I mean, at one point we went on a detachment and all the guys, when they go away, were wearing chinos, deck shoes, and some sort of blue shirt, striped or check. It's like an RAF uniform and maybe a blazer. And I looked around, I was wearing the same thing, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you know,
yeah.
When I think back, but I was literally dressed exactly the same. And, you know, perhaps I started swearing more, perhaps I started using, you know, drinking more on pints and things, but it all balances out, and you do realise that you need to sort of keep your own personality as well. But they all do as well. And you see it with youngsters coming in. They sort of go from being maybe quite quiet to taking on the persona that they are assuming that they have to have, being a young junta, junior member of the squadron.